First a fine, now it's cost him his job. Conservative chair Nadeem Zahawi is fired over his tax affairs, but offers no apology for a serious breach of the ministerial code. A review of prison policy. Transgender people convicted of violence against women won't be sent to female Scottish jails for now.
And back to Mullen. Can he win it here? Yes, he can!
And a dramatic game for the actor who owns Wrexham FC. But did it have a Hollywood ending?
This is ITV News with Paul Brand.
Good evening. For months, he insisted he did nothing wrong. He still hasn't acknowledged that he did. But tonight, Nadeem Zahawi, a man briefly in charge of the nation's taxes, is out of government, having failed to be open about his own. Today, the Prime Minister sacked him as Conservative chair for seriously breaching the ministerial code. From Mr Zahawi, there was no apology, but Rishi Sunak will hope that's the end of the sorry affair. Here's our political editor, Robert Peston.
Under siege, the last time the Tory chairman Nadeem Zahawi was seen in public, as the furore raged over why the tax authorities hit him with a penalty of more than £1 million and why for months he kept secret the details of the investigation into his tax affairs. Just before 9 this morning, the Prime Minister sacked him. One of the most senior ministers explained why.
We had an independent investigation into the allegations about Nadeem's conduct, and that independent advisor, Sir Laurie Magnus, wrote to the Prime Minister reflecting that, in his view, there'd been serious breaches of the ministerial code.
That independent advisor on ethics, Laurie Magnus, found that over 18 months, Mr Zahawi failed to make adequate disclosures to the government and the public about his dispute with the tax authorities. So his judgment was that Mr Zahawi's conduct as a minister has fallen below the high standards that any Prime Minister would expect. On the basis of that, the Prime Minister wrote to Nadeem Zahawi and he said, "It's clear there's been a serious breach of the ministerial code. As a result, I've informed you of my decision to remove you from your position in His Majesty's government." In reply, Mr Zahawi made no admission of wrongdoing, he showed no contrition, and he chose instead to criticise the media. Here's Nadeem Zahawi on that day in July when he was appointed Chancellor, the minister who sets our taxes. What the ethics advisor uncovered was that Mr Zahawi failed to make the proper declarations then that he was being investigated by the tax authorities. An investigation that would see HMRC levy a 30% penalty on him as part of a payment to HMRC of almost £5 million.
He told me he wasn't under investigation. He told me there was nothing wrong with his tax. All the tax was fully paid. He told me he had no interest in the offshore trust. All of these claims look false, and he must have known they were false when he made them. And he sent lawyers to threaten me with a libel action that could have ruined me.
Labour isn't satisfied.
So there are huge questions for Rishi Sunak to answer today. What did he know and when about that enormous settlement that Nadeem Zahawi was negotiating with HMRC and the huge penalty that he had to pay?
A senior Tory sees it a little differently.
When you read the letter this morning that he sent, it's pretty tough. It's pretty straightforward. It tells him in terms. It's none of this nonsense about, I've accepted your resignation. It's I've sacked you.
Nadeem Zahawi leaving Conservative HQ a few days ago. Will he be the last of Mr Sunak's ministers to be forced out? Not if this government's history is any guide.
And Robert's here with me in the studio. So some debate there in your report, Robert, but presumably this will have implications for the Prime Minister as well as for Nadeem Zahawi.
Well, it's certainly got big implications for Nadeem Zahawi. I mean, 7 breaches of the ministerial code. I've got the report here of the ethics advisor. I've never heard anything like it. I mean, it's completely damning. As David Davis actually said today, I mean, his chances of returning ever to government, Zahawi, are sort of slim to none. For Sunak, OK, there are 2 ways of looking at it. On the one hand, as soon as he became aware of the magnitude of the investigation that was carried out against Zahawi in terms of his tax affairs, as soon as he discovered the magnitude of the way that he simply hadn't fulfilled his obligations to disclose that investigation to civil servants, to ministers, to the public, he was gone. But, I mean, frankly, you know, for months and months and months there have been reports about these tax investigations. One question is why the Prime Minister didn't actively ask more questions to make sure that all members of his cabinet are fit and proper. Now, Rishi Sunak has learned a very expensive lesson. He'll rue the day that he appointed Nadeem Zahawi because, you know, he's currently trying to persuade the country that he's fixing the health service crisis. He's going to make some announcements tomorrow. Nobody's interested in any of that. They just want to know who's the next minister to go because of wrongdoing.
All right, Robert, thank you very much. The Scottish Government's announced that transgender people convicted of violence against women will no longer be sent to female prisons. A temporary policy has been enacted while a review takes place following public debate around several high-profile cases. Neil Connery reports.
The case of Isla Bryson, a trans woman convicted of raping 2 women before changing gender, led to concern over transgender inmates in Scotland's women's prisons. She was initially remanded to Corton Vale Women's Prison before being moved to a men's jail after the outcry. Now it's emerged Tiffany Scott, a trans woman previously known as Andrew Burns with a history of violence, is reported to have had her application to move to a women's prison approved. But the Scottish Prison Service is now pausing the movement of all trans inmates with a history of violence against women while it conducts an urgent review. Tonight, Scotland's Justice Secretary said, "I understand that the issue of any trans woman being convicted of violent and sexual offences is a highly emotive subject and that the public concern is understandable."
Well, the Scottish Government have been shamed into doing this after a huge public backlash over the fact a double rapist was sent into a women's prison, and then it emerged that a highly dangerous individual was also due to be sent into a women's prison. They have done the right thing, but it's taken them far too long to have arrived at this position.
The Scottish Prison Service's urgent review will report back on Friday. Neil Connery, ITV News.
After 3 days of bloodshed between Israelis and Palestinians, the pain of families was on display today as funerals were held for the dead. So too was the anger of Israel's Prime Minister, who warned of a heavy hand against those he called terrorists. Lucy Watson reports from Jerusalem.
The language of grief is shared on both sides of this conflict. And the cries are once again getting louder. This a son's anguish for a father he says died a hero among 7 Israelis killed at a synagogue on Friday. It is blood for blood. Violence has gripped Jerusalem and the West Bank for days. Wadi Abu Ramuz was a 17-year-old Palestinian shot by Israel's forces on Wednesday in Silwan, East Jerusalem. His mother by his side before he died. It hurts so much. The house is empty without him, she told me. I wish I could see him again. But this family, his brothers, must wait to mourn him. They cannot hold his funeral because the Israeli authorities haven't yet released his body.
I just want his body back. I just want his body back.
Frustrations are rising as the new far-right government's punishments increase.
We do not want to worsen the situation, but we are prepared for any scenario. Our answer to terrorism is a heavy hand and a strong, swift and precise response.
Swift indeed. The 2 homes of 2 young Palestinian gunmen are already being sealed off and prepared for demolition. Destroying this house is the Israeli government's way of exacting a price on who they deem the enemy. They say they don't want to escalate the violence, but the tension here is palpable. This is an ongoing struggle with anger among the young and a hopelessness. We are all like my friend Wadi, he tells me, and we will all die in the same way. It is how they live here, where peace feels not unlikely, but impossible. Lucy Watson, ITV News, Jerusalem.
Police have charged a 16-year-old boy with murdering a girl aged 15 in Northumberland. Police say Holly Newton's family are devastated beyond words after she was stabbed to death in Hexham on Friday. Holly's school described her as a truly lovely student who was quiet, conscientious, helpful and kind. The Housing Secretary has admitted that the government was partly to blame for the Grenfell disaster. Promising reforms, Michael Gove said guidance at the time allowed developers to cut corners and put profit before lives. Ukrainian soldiers have landed in the UK to learn how to use British tanks against Russian forces. The Ministry of Defence shared photographs of troops getting off an RAF plane this weekend and says they'll begin training on the Challenger 2 tanks on Monday. And Dame Esther Rantzen has revealed she's been diagnosed with lung cancer. The 82-year-old broadcaster announced that while the cancer has spread, she's remaining optimistic thanks to new treatments. And finally, Hollywood star Ryan Reynolds was in the stands as his Wrexham team delivered a blockbuster evening in the FA Cup. And while they were denied victory against Sheffield United, it was a night fans won't forget. Chris Scudder reports.
Wrexham's leading man was missing his co-star and co-owner for this classic, but at least Rob McElhenney was keeping Ryan Reynolds company on the phone. And what a story followed. Wrexham were a goal down at the interval.
Sheffield United lead.
But the underdogs came biting back in a second-half thriller. 1-1 became 2-1 to the non-league club, and the shock was on. But hang on, more drama. Ollie Norwood scored for the Blades to equalise 2-2, and more tension as Daniel Jebison was sent off for Sheffield United. This had more plot twists than any blockbuster, and when Paul Mullin put Wrexham back in front, it looked like the coup de grace. There's only one Ryan Reynolds, sang the Wrexham fans, but never bow before the final curtain.
Through.
And John Egan applied the ultimate story spoiler, an equalising goal, 3-3, which means there'll have to be a replay. What a thriller. Stand by for the sequel. Chris Scudder, ITV News.
And that's it for this evening. From all of us here on the Weekend Team, have a very good night.
It's a cold and wet outlook with some heavy downpours throughout the day. Heinz Big Soup sponsors ITV National Weather.
Hello and a very good evening to you. Hope you're all keeping well. So we do have some more windy weather in the forecast as we go through the next few days. On Monday, high pressure will take control of things, so the winds eventually easing off. However, on Tuesday, got low pressure working its way towards, and you can see the squeeze on the isobars. Very windy conditions, especially across northern parts. For northern parts of Scotland, could be looking at severe gales here. Now, in the meantime, for the rest of the overnight period, that cloud and drizzle starts to push its way southwards, clearer skies behind it, and 1 or 2 showers, which could be wintry across the higher ground in Scotland. But for most of us, it will be dry, and that wind will be keeping the temperatures above freezing. So a bit of a blustery start today, first thing tomorrow morning, especially close to North Sea coast there. And eventually, we'll lose this cloud and drizzle across the south. So for most of us, actually, a good deal of sunshine. It will be developing, although later on in the day, we'll see some cloud and a little bit of rain moving in to the far northwest. Bye-bye.
Heinz Big Soup sponsors ITV National Weather.
Feels like home, whatever the weather. Valent Boilers and Heat Pumps sponsors ITV London Weekend Weather.
Hello there. Very good evening to you. Yes, today we've seen quite a bit of cloud cover, a little sunshine into this afternoon, but I love this photo that Rob captured earlier this morning. A little pesky squirrel there trying to get the bird food off the bird feeder. first thing today. Now, as we go through the week ahead, it's set to be a fairly windy week, actually. We've got an area of low pressure to the far north of the country, higher pressure anchoring itself to the far southwest. And actually, the source region of the air is from the Atlantic, so it does stay fairly mild through much of this week. But where we do see these systems push their way through, it will be quite windy at times. So back to the here and now for this evening and overnight. Well, we've got the weather front sinking its way southwards, just introducing a little bit more cloud. There'll be some light outbreaks of rain or drizzle for a time during the early hours, but I think we start Monday morning. Temperatures about 4 to 6 degrees Celsius, and with that patchy cloud around through the first part of the day too. It will improve though as we go through the morning and in fact into the afternoon. Plenty of sunshine, barely a cloud in the sky for all of us. The winds coming in from a northwesterly direction. They'll be fairly light through tomorrow afternoon as well, with top temperatures of 7 to 9, maybe even 10 degrees Celsius, 50 Fahrenheit. Some patchy outbreaks of rain on Tuesday, turning windy at times though for the rest of the week. Bye-bye.
Valent sponsors ITV London Weekend Weather.